Chapter 18. He stood there, adjusting his cuffs, eyes crinkling. Did you think I was a thief? I felt the color draining from my face. What are you doing? He lifted one eyebrow and said, Going down to the party. Where else would I be going tonight? Jane and I were mute, too shocked to answer. I hope you don't mind, Lisbette, but I don't plan to dance much this evening, he said. All the same, I think we'll be obliged to dance at least once, just for appearance sake. Keep an opening for me, will you? Then with one last tug on his dress coat, he started down the hall toward the stairs. Jane started running the moment I did. We caught up with him, each taking an arm and forcing him to stop. Timothy, are you mad? The place is crawling with soldiers. He smiled at both of us. Then don't ruin my grand entrance by wrinkling my coat. Don't be an idiot, I said. How can you go down there without even a mask? I can't wear a mask, not when I'm hosting, Lisbette. Have you been crying? I have not. I said, you know I never cry. He narrowed his eyes at me, and I suddenly remembered my promise. I felt my cheeks go crimson. Fine, I was crying, but only because I have a cold coming on. Don't I have a cold coming on, Jane? She does. She may even have a fever. I felt her head myself. Then I'd advise you to go straight home, he said. You'll only make it worse by staying. I caught my breath. Go home? He patted my shoulder. Yes, go home. I'll ask Mother to send some mutton jelly over in the morning. He moved around me and started for the stairs once more. I clasped Jane's hand. We have to stop him. It's too late. He's already on the gallery. I'll never forgive him for this, I said, starting after him. How dare he get arrested, and on this night, too? Jane was tugging violently at my hand. No, Lisbette. You can't be seen following him. Even if they take him to jail, you can't let people think you're in love with him if he's not planning on marrying you. If you go now, it will create a scene. If I don't go now, he'll be taken away in chains. Don't be dramatic, she said, straining to hold on to me. Would Timothy walk down there if he didn't know what he was doing? I paused. You think he has some kind of plan? I have no idea what he's got in mind, Jane said, but I think you should trust that he knows what he's doing. I put my hand to his mouth. Oh, Jane, I love him so frightfully. Then you must tell him, she said, and quickly in case they do arrest him. Only no matter what happens, you can't make a scene. But he just told me to go home. He would never have said a thing like that if he had any intention of ratifying the contract before midnight. There's a good chance he was only protecting his own heart with all his talk just now. After all, you did make things clear to the entire county that you never cared a fig for him. That kind of thing is bound to sting and harden a person. Only, for heaven's sake, whatever you do, be subtle. But it was, after all, too late for subtlety. By the time we reached the gallery ourselves, Timothy was downstairs and surrounded by a crowd of people, all loudly expressing their wonder and surprise at seeing him. Whatever rumors had been going around about Timothy, his friends, which were many, were still loyal. Jane and I gazed at the spectacle. It was like a melodrama in which the hero comes home to the adoring masses. And to make the melodrama complete, in came George right on cue. Despite the fact that he himself had prophesied this very event, it was clear that George could not quite believe his eyes. He recovered, however, and pushed his way back into the throng, throwing off his mask and shouting, Back away! Back away! I flung myself down the stairs. I had no plan but to save the man I loved from George. Only I stopped short when Timothy's voice stilled the crowd. Captain Hargrove, I don't remember seeing your name on the guest list. George reared at the confidence in Timothy's voice, suddenly uncertain. What is this? Why have you come out of hiding? To celebrate with my family and friends, of course. We are, if nothing else, loyalists to the king. You know I have to arrest you now. An eruption of dissent broke out. Timothy raised his hand and quieted his neighbors. On what charges? George was hopelessly outnumbered, so I thought it was a very brave thing when he said, You were accused of stealing the royal seal and attempting a coup, and I have been ordered to bring you in for questioning. And while it was undoubtedly brave, it was also a bit ridiculous. Poor George, with his meticulously tied but outdated cravat, trying desperately to assert his authority even when his voice broke on the last word. A few people snickered, but not Timothy. He answered with quiet gravity, Then you must do your duty. Objections fired up all around him. Timothy held up his hands and made everyone be quiet. Addressing himself solely to George, he said, But you will not do your duty until after the ball. At that time, you have my word that I will come willingly and answer every one of your questions. I will not leave, however, until after we have raised the flag for the new king. Now, surround this house if you will with 1,000 soldiers, but my word is good. There will be no need for force when the evening is over. George looked very much like he wanted to press the subject, but as he glanced around at the hostile faces surrounding him, he must have realized that not even an army was going to take Timothy out of that house without a good deal of unwanted trouble. Very well, George said. When the flag is raised, you will submit to an armed escort and return to headquarters with me. I held my breath. You have my word, Captain. And with that, Timothy left the hall for the library, taking a good deal of the men in the party with him. Forgotten, I was left with the rest of the nameless spectators whose time on the stage was over. Below, George spun on his heels and stalked in the opposite direction, in search, no doubt, for more companionable company. Oh, Lisbette, Jane whispered to me, what does it mean? I suppose it means that, but I didn't know what it meant any more than she did, so I said doggedly, Come on, Jane, it's time we were dancing. And that is what we did, although I cannot pretend that I enjoyed any of it. It would be a lie to say that my troubles were soothed away by the merriment of the music. But at least it was better than sitting at Aunt Geraldine's side, worrying myself to death over what was going to happen when the ball ended. The atmosphere was electric after Timothy's arrival, and the floor shook with all the pounding feet of the dancers. Helplessly, I threw off my anxiety and, fretting into the steps of the dance, waltzed the fine line between terror and hysteria. When it came time for the quadrille, I was breathless and parched for a drink, but instead of resting, I recklessly accepted a new partner and allowed him to lead me to the dance floor. Examining his dark curls, I had my suspicions who he might be, but then I saw his blue eyes twinkling at me, and I knew. I said, Have you danced with Jane yet, Mr. Bigby? His eyes widened. How did you know? You really ought to have waxed your hair flat if you wanted to stay anonymous, but you didn't answer my question. He shook his head, glancing over to where Jane was dancing with someone in a red mask. I mean to try for the cotillion. You did give her my message, didn't you, Miss Blackwood? I hesitated. Let's just say that she got the message. Fortunately, this seemed to satisfy him, and he asked me no more questions, which might otherwise have been difficult to answer. Normally it would have been a pleasure to dance with him, for Mr. Bigby was a very good dancer, but I could see that the men were coming out of the library now, and I was distracted every time someone new came into the room. The clock on the wall read 10:30. Where was Timothy, and what was his plan? Thomas had joined the dancing, and if he were at all worried for his brother, he was hiding it very well. Trey, too, had emerged encumbered with crutches. Whenever I saw him, it was always by the windows, looking overly flushed and excited. As for Henry, I saw him the least, which was in no wise comforting. When I could see him, and as I predicted his height gave him away, I was worried that he was drawing too much attention. When he was out of sight, I fretted that someone had discovered his true identity. The dance ended, and I was about to advise Mr. Bigby not to waste any more time concerning my sister, only he took my hand and squeezed it. I can't say more, but look for a turnaround in our luck tonight. He left me baffled, but before I could work out what he could possibly mean, my partner for the cotillion found me. By now, all members of the Easton household were accounted for except Timothy. The music started, and my partner began the necessary niceties as we followed the steps. I was doing only tolerably well answering his questions, when suddenly there was a stir at the far end of the room. I wasn't the only one who stopped dancing in order to see Timothy entering the ballroom. He was still preoccupied with his admirers and well-wishers, and it struck me that Timothy had never been so popular before, although he seemed to be taking it in stride. He looked neither proud nor daring, but simply plain old Timothy, unflustered and unconcerned with his newfound fame. It was with deep and forced concentration that I finished that dance, and when I returned to Aunt Geraldine, I passed within 5 feet of Timothy where he stood in conversation with Mr. Bigby. I racked my mind to think what on earth John Bigby could have to say to Timothy that was more important than the significant fact that our contract was about to expire. The truth of it hit me like a grim but obvious truth. This was Timothy's revenge. He was going to make me suffer with suspense, and then at the last minute he was going to ask me to come to the library and sign the contract. I shook my head at the simplicity of it all and then ground my teeth at the pettiness. Well, perhaps I deserved it. Very well, Timothy Easton, you may play your little game at my expense, and then we will call it Pax, with no more words said about it. Anne leaned eagerly toward me and said, Everyone keeps coming up to us to ask if there's to be a wedding. No one seems to believe that Timothy is in any serious kind of trouble anymore. They all think he'll be let go after he's been arrested tonight. And now every mother and daughter in this room is plotting to take your place as the next girl to marry the Easton fortune, Aunt Geraldine said sourly. He'll marry Judith or Lolly, you'll see, and will forever be the laughingstock of the town, all because you were too much of a fool to take what was handed to you.